Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Greetings. Welcome to Swayam Prabha DTH 16 channel. My name is Ariba Shapir and we are discussing English language teaching. Today we will start a new module, Methods of Teaching English Language. And before we take a deep dive into the conceptual framework of the methodologies and techniques that are being used in teaching language, let us try to recapitulate of what we did in the last session. In the last session, we discussed that how classrooms are absolutely part of the real world. We tried to figure out that how classrooms are connected with cultural context and they are associated with each other. If we bring real life context into the classrooms, we can expect better outcomes. Besides, we also learned that authentic language use is an important component for any classroom material. So, we need to be particular with regard to its use and usage. The other thing is that language learning can be motivated by moving beyond rehearsal for the future and by bringing encounters who do not share the same L1 into the present. After this session, you will be able to understand grammar translation method and the direct method. These are two important and essential components of any language teaching method. And today we will introduce these methods in order to understand that grammar translation method and direct method have been used for over decades and they are still in practice. And we will also develop a general understanding of both the methods to learn language teaching pedagogy and how we can incorporate these two methods into our classroom. So, dear learners, when we talk about methods of language teaching, the first method that comes to our mind is grammar translation method. It is not a new method. It is the old method. In fact, it was known as the classical method also. So, let us figure out what is grammar translation method, how can we incorporate grammar translation method, or what are its disadvantages or demerits of using it into the language classroom. So, I'll try to narrate a situation where we will come across with a classroom and in the classroom we will find a teacher who will be teaching language through this particular method. And we will also figure out the questions that will be raised by the students, what will be the reply of the teacher and how the language teaching is going to be dealt through this method. So, let us try to understand that how this GT method works and I'll try to tell you the situation. First, we will incorporate some students into the classroom and then we will see that how teacher responds to the questions and how she comes across with teaching. So, first what happens is that as you enter into the classroom, you find that the class is going on and in the classroom there is a story that is being written by R.K. Narayan and students are reading that story and that story is waiting for the Mahatma. So, I am writing over here waiting for the Mahatma. This is a famous text. Now, in this story, what happens is that students are reading it loudly. So, the first component or a technique that is essential in a grammar translation method is that reading takes place. Each student is called on to read a few lines from the passage and after they finish the reading, they are asked to understand it or they are asked to translate it into Hindi language or the native language. So, the second thing which I am writing over here is translation that takes place in grammar translation method. Now, next thing what happens is that the teacher helps them to develop a new vocabulary items, and he or she tries to translate those difficult words into the native language. So, this grammar translation method also deals with vocabulary items. Now, what happens is that one girl asks a question and she says, "Teacher, can you tell us what is the meaning of that non-violence is not conceived as a weapon of the weakest, but the choice of the strongest?" Then what happens is that the teacher tries to explain what is weak. She tells or he tells that weak refers to marginalized people, weak refers to farmers or maybe women, and then she interrelates this concept with the other parts of the sentence. So you can easily identify that the components in a sentence are being treated in isolated way. They are not being used in a context. So I'm writing here is that thing that takes place over here is that teacher resolves the rhetoric devices meaning by explaining it into the classes, and isolated contexts or isolated sentences are being dealt. Since the students have no more questions, the teacher asks them to write the answers to the comprehension passages. So, comprehension passage is one of the examples of using a grammar translation method. And after 1.5 hours, the teacher asks them to translate it into Hindi language or in Bengali language, depending upon the scenario and the native language preference. So the teacher asks the students to translate it. A passage is being given, and the students together start converting those sentences in an isolated way, and they rewrite it in their native language. Now the teacher says that students have to turn on the page, and there is a list of words there. So an exercise takes place, and in this exercise students are asked to find out the difficult words. For example, ambition, for example, words like non-violence or determination, and teacher asks them to rewrite these words in the native language. So as you see the whole scenario, you find out that grammar translation, as the name itself suggests, mainly talks about grammar, mainly talks about translation. And when we say grammar, we mainly refer to the structural part of the sentence. We consider that language has a prescriptive approach, and we have to learn the grammar in a certain way, in a certain flow, and therefore we will take up the language, we will acquire and learn the language in that way. The other examples the teacher can incorporate in grammar translation is, for let's say she or he asks to take out two verb phrases or two verb words. For example, get up, come in, and so on. So in this way, what happens is that teacher mainly focuses on essential components of the language, deals each and every word in an isolated way, and also tries to explain this method by telling the importance of the translation, and encourages the students to translate it in a better way. So here is the crux of all the techniques that are being used in grammar translation method. So we saw and realized that in the example, translation of literary passage takes place, reading comprehension questions occur, students were asked to deal with vocabulary items, so antonyms and synonyms can also be used, cognates can also be used, fill in the blanks were the main exercises. And also we cannot ignore the fact that grammar translation method focuses on memorization. It focuses on rote translation because it refers to structural part of the language. It focuses on the rules, so it mainly focuses on memorization of rules and then applying those rules by and applying those rules in the sentences that come across. So after taking up the example of grammar translation method, let us try to find out what are the principles of this method. So as you see in the slide, a fundamental purpose of learning a foreign language is to be able to read literature in it. So in the first example, we realized that the reading of the text takes place, and on the basis of that comprehension text or on the basis of that literary piece of text, students build questions and the teacher responds to it. An important goal is for students to be able to translate each language into the other. Translation is the main component and it is largely emphasized. The ability to communicate in the target language is not a goal of foreign language instruction. So when we are asked to deal vocabulary and when we are asked to memorize grammatical rules, we mainly focus on written part of it. Spoken was not really encouraged in this method because teacher used native language as a medium of instruction. And this is something which is to be noted here, that medium of instruction remains a native language. It is not the target language. A whole scenario occurs in the bilingual mode, and therefore we can eventually conclude that this particular method does not focus on verbal communication, but it is largely on structure and also of the vocabulary items. The other thing is that the primary skills is to be developed, that are reading and writing, and the teacher is the authority in the classroom. So students were supposed to ask the questions and the teacher is the person who knows all. So teacher is the main component, or you can say that the teacher plays a central role in the classroom and the teacher has the whole authority of responding to it. The other thing is, in such scenario we say that the classroom remains teacher centered. There are two types of classrooms that I would like to discuss over here: learner centered and the teacher centered classroom. So generally what happens in teacher centered classroom, the teacher takes a central position and teacher the authority of the teacher is always higher, and there is a less participation of students. However, in the learner centered class, there is more participation of students. Students are given equal opportunity to participate in the class. The tasks and the activities are being carried out by the students. However, the teacher also remains at the front, but teacher is more of a supportive and collaborative kind of entity in the classroom. Learning the form of the language is important. So how language is written, how it is being produced, what components does it include? For example, it includes subject, it includes verb, it includes object, how it is being placed in a sentence, that are being emphasized in grammar translation method. Deductive application of an explicit grammar rule is a pedagogical technique. Now here again we are coming across with two important terms: deductive, and the opposite of it is inductive. So in deductive approach of teaching grammar or any concept is that first we will state the rule and then with the help of the derivation we will go on with the example. However, in inductive approach we first take up the example and on the basis of that example we drive a rule. So that's a difference between these two terms. And in the grammar translation method, deductive application is largely used. the other thing is students should be conscious of the grammatical rules of the target language. Even in the modern day scenario, we see there are thousands of books that are available in the market, and these books incorporate number of exercises where students are asked or instructed to convert the sentences into active, passive, and there are drills and practices that takes place. So that's the main idea of the grammatical of the grammar translation method. In the last, we see that verb conjugations and grammatical paradigms should be committed to memory, because memorization is something which is important, and to acquire any rule we need to memorize it, and therefore students are expected to memorize the rules of the grammar, and that's how they're supposed to apply those rules in order to translate the passage. So now let us try to review the principles that we just studied. And the first question that comes to our mind is that what are the goals of teachers when we say that we use grammar translation method? What do we expect from grammar translation method? Is it successful enough? Is it worth utilizing? So let us try to figure out. As according to the teachers of grammar translation method, a fundamental purpose of learning a foreign language is to be able to read a literature. So literature is largely emphasized, and reading is being introduced through literature only. So to do this, students need to learn about the written formats, about the written components that are being used in literature, and students in this way learn grammar rules. And they also learn vocabulary through grammar translation method. In addition, it is believed that students when using a foreign language, they develop good mental exercise because they are encouraged to translate. So we can say that mental exercise is being reviewed as great, and it is mainly used in GT method, that is grammar translation method. The next question that comes here is that what is the role of the teacher in the grammar translation, or what is the role of the students? So the answer to this question is that the roles are traditional. Traditional roles are there, and the teacher is authority. So I'm mentioning in this slide, teacher is an authority, and students do as a teacher says. So students are not authority. So we can conclude from these two important points is that the classroom remains teacher centered. Now the next question is, what are some characteristics of the teaching and learning process? So characteristics include that translation takes place, and they translate a text from target language to native language, and in the same way the native language is being translated into target language. So the translation takes place in both the ways, and they are expected not only to have a fine understanding of the target language, its components and its sentence structures, but also the fine understanding of the native language that is being practiced into their classroom and also out of their classroom. The next question that arises here is that what is the nature of the student and teacher interaction? So most of the interaction in the classroom is from the teacher. So this again takes us to the point number 4, that teacher remains authority, teacher interacts with these students, and teacher is the person who tells what is right and what is wrong, corrects the students, and guides the students in a way. And the other question is that what are the skills that are mainly used in grammar translation method? And the answer to this question is that reading and writing are mainly emphasized. Now this takes us back to the point number 1, that that by reading a literature we focus on reading part. Students develop an understanding of difficult vocabulary, they understand grammatical structures, and also they get to know about the culture of that particular scenario or a country or a city through that piece of the text. Now, why we say that writing is mainly emphasized? Because translation is the main component over here. So since grammar rules and vocabulary are embedded into the learners activities, and therefore they are expected to produce fine grammatical sentences. Now the next question is that how is the language viewed, okay, and how is culture viewed? So literary language, I'm writing over here since there is a lack of space, but I'll try to make an attempt, that literature, or you can say literary language, is considered superior over any other language. So not a conversational style, or maybe not a normal dialogue, but if you use literary text into your classroom, it will be largely emphasized, it will be considered more appropriate with regards to the usage in the classroom. So literary text is mainly considered superior over any other text. And what is the role of the students' native language? So students, while reading up the passage, translate it into the native language, and they do it vice versa also. So native language is considered important, and it plays an equal role in the language learning and teaching. In the entire example, or in the entire principle, in the principles we studied, that the role of the teacher is the main, and the meaning of the target language is made clear by translating into the student's native language. So the language is used in class is mostly the student's native language. And the last question that comes under the heading of the GT method is that how assessment takes place, how evaluation is being carried out. And to give this answer, that written test in which students are asked to translate from their native language to the target language are often used. The quality is being determined, the vocabulary words are being compared, and questions about the target culture or questions that ask students to apply grammatical rules are also common. So how far they are able to successfully apply those rules and convert it into the native language and the native languages to the target language, they are being assessed on that part. So this takes us back to the point that memorization plays an important role. If a student has not memorized the grammatical structures, he or she may find it difficult or maybe challenging to attain the process of language learning. Now the other method that we are going to study today is the direct method, and it came after the grammar translation method. This method is interesting. This method came up with some kind of reform, and this reform tried to resolve the issues that take place in language teaching and learning. So let us try to understand what direct method is, how it is being incorporated in language learning classroom, and how can we use it successfully in our classrooms. So in order to understand the direct method, let us quickly go into classroom and take the example of what is going on in it. In the direct method, I'm writing over here. In the direct method, the teacher is calling the class to order as the students find seats towards the back of the room. Teacher brings a map, a big map. So we can say that an object is being used in order to explain the processes or phenomena or concepts. And teacher places at the front of the classroom. So we can say that object is being used in the immediate classroom. The second thing is that the lesson is entitled as looking at a map. Looking at a map. So students have got the idea that a map will be displayed in front of them, and by looking up at the map, they will be able to understand what is it about, what components does it include, and what is the area that they are going to focus on. So while looking up at the map, students are being called one by one and they read a sentence from the reading passage. Now here again, reading passage or reading is largely emphasized. So at the beginning of the session, reading passage takes place. The teacher points out to the part of the map the sentence describes after each has read this sentence. So for example, if the map of India is being shown to the students and students read out that India is a country which has Indian Ocean in the south and Bay of Bengal in the east and Arabian Sea in the west. So teacher at the same time points out the Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal and Indian Ocean, explaining that these are the seas that are being located over these areas. Now let us try to understand that what a student reads out, that India lies in South Asia. Now while showing up the map, the teacher explains that this is the South Asia and India is located at the southern part of the Asia. It has 28 states, so teacher tries to draw the boundaries, or teacher puts up the circle and draws lines in order to show that there are 28 states. One student reads out that the largest state of India is Rajasthan. So teacher again points out to the Rajasthan and tells the students that this is the biggest state in India. And similarly, other students reveal that India consists of many rivers. So teacher draws a line by showing that this river goes from northern to the southern area, from eastern to western area, and so on. So in this way, language learning is taking place and there is no translation that is being happening. Once after this, the students finish the passage, they are asked if they have any questions. So a student asks, ma'am or sir, please tell what is peninsula. So again, the teacher goes to the southern part, tries to show that India is being covered by three areas of three seas, and tries to locate that on the eastern side there is Bay of Bengal, on the southern side there is Indian Ocean, and on the western side there is an Arabian Sea, and India is also covered by land on the upper part. So that's how peninsula is called as. The student says, oh, okay, I understand it. Now in this entire scenario, it is pretty clear that students need not to understand in the native language, rather he or she gets it through the object and the teacher's explanation. The entire conversation, or you can say dialogue, takes place in the target language and not at all in the native language or any other. The question and answer in the same way continues for a few more minutes, and teacher invites the students to ask questions. The hands goes on, and after several questions have been posed, one girl asks, teacher, please tell us where is Trivandrum. So again, teacher goes into the southern part of the India, points out that the Trivandrum is there, and you can say that while saying that Trivandrum is there, he or she works out with the student to improve the pronunciation of Trivandrum. So maybe the child is not able to pronounce it, or he or she is finding it difficult to pronounce it. So in order to understand and learn the pronunciation, the teacher works out with the student, and the right pronunciation is being developed in such a way. So I'm writing over here that pronunciation is also emphasized in direct method. Now the next thing is that teacher next instructs the students to turn on to exercises and do fill in the blanks. So fill in the blanks are also used here. Okay, they read a sentence aloud and supply the missing word that they are reading. In this way, the direct method goes on. Since it came out after the grammar translation method, it brought reforms. The teacher facilitates the answers by pointing out towards the object, tries to explain it. The queries of students are largely incorporated, and the conversation that takes place is completely in the target language. And that, through this way, you understand that it is not just the reading and writing that are being emphasized. Rather, spoken communication are also taken up into consideration. So let us now quickly go through what are the techniques that can be used in direct method. So reading aloud is one of the important techniques that can be used. Question and answer exercises, getting students to self-correct themselves. So by saying that self-correction needs to take place, I mean that that teacher do not interfere when they make mistakes. Rather, students, they themselves realize by knowing that they are committing some kind of error, and when they repeat it or when they use the same word or same kind of situation, they try to come up in a better version. Conversation practice takes place. So in the entire example, we learned that the teacher and the student conversation is taking place, but this conversation is in the target language. Fill in the blanks exercises like in grammar translation method, in direct method also it takes place. Dictation also takes place, and paragraph writing can also be incorporated in direct method, and whatever the understanding the students have gained, they can apply it and they can write a paragraph on the basis of it. So not much of memorization takes place, but it is more conversational. It is an object oriented teaching method, and it has certainly gained the interest of students. So let us quickly see the principles of direct method. Reading in the target language should be taught from the beginning of the language instruction. So reading takes place, and students read out each and every sentence. The teacher demonstrates the meaning of it or locate the meaning of that particular sentence by pointing towards the object that is being used in the immediate classroom. The second point, as mentioned in the slide, says that objects in the immediate classroom environment should be used to help students understand the meaning. That is something we have just understood. The other thing is the native language should not be used in the classroom, and the teacher should demonstrate, not explain or translate. So translation is in a layman's language, I would say that translation is forbidden here, and teacher is not explaining it, but is trying to demonstrate the entire phenomena or explaining the meaning of it with the help of that particular object. Students should learn to think in the target language. Since there is no use of the native language, students are forced, or you can say they are encouraged to think that way. And in the example, we understood that how students say, okay, I understand. when they got to know about a certain terminology, they inquired, and then after knowing the process or after knowing the conceptual meaning of it, they agreed to it, and they are encouraged to learn and think in the target language. The other thing is that is mentioned in the principles of direct method is that the purpose of language learning is communication. In the entire example, we saw that communication is the key purpose, and with this method we try to solve out the problems of spoken communication. We try to solve out that communication is not only consigned to reading and writing, but it is also extended to spoken and listening. Self-correction facilitates language learning. Besides, grammar should be taught inductively, and the syllabus should be taught on situations or topics, not usually on linguistic structures. Okay, so now let us try to review the principles of direct method, and let us set up some questions and we will go answering those questions accordingly. So the first question, as you see in the slide, I am writing over here direct method. So the first question that comes over here is that what are the goals? What do we expect? What is the outcome that we expect from this particular method? Direct method is an interesting one. It has brought reform to the language teaching pedagogy. It has given more space to both teacher and the learner. So as far as this point is concerned, that the goals of teachers, what are the goals of the teachers? We would say that teachers who use the direct method intend that students learn to communicate. Since we studied that spoken communication, listening communication are important, so communication is the main idea of direct method. And in order to do this successfully, students should learn to think in the target language. In the grammar translation method, what happened, that students were asked to think in the native language. But in the direct method, students are largely emphasized or encouraged to use and think in the target language only. The other question that comes over here is that what is the role of the teacher in the direct method and what is the role of the students? So teacher directs the class activities. Teacher directs the class activities. And who does this? Teacher. The student role is less passive than in the grammar translation method. The teacher and the students are more like a partners. Okay, and they are partners in the language learning and teaching process. The next question that arises here is, what are some characteristics of the teaching learning process? So teachers who use the direct method believe that students need to associate meaning and the target language directly. So association of meaning and in order to do this, when the teacher introduces the new target language or word or phrases, she or he demonstrates. So explanation is not something which is encouraged here, rather demonstration is largely emphasized. So you first demonstrate and then develop an understanding of what the idea is or what the concept is. So I'm writing over here is demonstration is something that takes place. There is no translation in the direct method, and this is pretty clear from the very beginning that direct method stands opposite to what grammar translation method is. So students speak in the target language, they deal with the grammar in the target language, they learn the concept, they they understand the examples in the target language. There is no component as such translation. So grammar is taught inductively, grammar is included, and it believes that grammar is important skill for any language use, and therefore the first thing that they demonstrate is the example, and through the example they reach out to the to the rule. The next question that arises over here is that what is the nature of the student to student interaction? Now the initiation of the interaction goes both ways. So teacher and teacher and you can say to student, and student to teacher. This is happening in both the ways. And although the letter is often directed, teacher provides a guidance, gives a motivation and support the students. Students converse with another as well. So it is not just that the teacher speaks, students also speak, and they also converse among themselves. Now the next question that comes over here is that how language is viewed and how culture is viewed. So language is primarily spoken, okay, and spoken is emphasized. It is not the written communication which is given importance in this method. Therefore students learn, use everyday topics, everyday conversational dialogues in the target language, and they also study culture or the history of the people who speak the target language. So whatever happens is happening through the target language. And what areas of language are emphasized? Vocabulary is emphasized over grammar. Vocabulary is emphasized over grammar, and although work takes place on all the four skills: listening, speaking, reading and writing, but we saw and realized that spoken communication is mainly taken into consideration. Besides, we saw that listening also takes place, because in a conversation it is not just the spoken part that comes up, listening also goes hand in hand. So listening and spoken are mainly emphasized, reading and written are not that frequent, but yeah, grammar is being considered. However, grammar is taught inductively, vocabulary is given more importance. Now the next question here is, what is the role of the student's native language? So there is no role as such prescribed in the direct method with regard to the there is no role of the native language in using direct method, and the entire dependency is on the target language. So in a way we can say that this method is independent. And how does the teacher respond to student errors? That is one of the essential questions that come over here, that how teacher responds to the students. So the teacher, employing various techniques, tries to get the students to self correct. Now here again the term has come, self correction or self correct. Here teacher doesn't interfere when students make mistakes, rather teacher facilitates the appropriate way of saying it. So for instance, we take up the example of Trivandrum, where students was finding difficulty in pronouncing the particular name of the city. So in that way teacher works with the student, okay, and here teacher is an aid, teacher supports, or teacher student relationship develops, and a rapport is being evolved, and in this way students come up from their problems. And there are many times when they are not when they are not targeted on their errors, rather they are given a chance to make errors and then realize what is not accurate, and when they use it again in their real life context, they eventually self correct themselves. So self correction is a major technique in direct method. However, in the grammar translation method, self correction is not being given the platform. So after having a thorough understanding of grammar translation method and direct method, let us try to conclude of what we learned so far. In the grammar translation method, we learned that students use native language for communication, but it mainly teaches the target language, but it doesn't tell how to use it. So as you see in the slide, grammar translation method focuses on reading the literature in the target language. It is not using a conversational approach, and it is more on literary piece or a kind of text that can be used in a language classroom. Now, when it comes to culture, like when we talk about language, we often say that language and culture are inseparable entities and they are very much interconnected. But in grammar translation method, we are not viewing culture as a separate entity, but we introduce culture through literature. So when a student go through the literature, they also get to know about the cultural component of it. They get to know about, for example, that we just mentioned in the example that we have gone through, the R.K. Narayan's story, in which the rise of the Mahatma is being discussed. We understood that culture is mainly emphasized through the piece of the literature. So the total scenario of the pre-independence period is being portrayed over there. Struggles were also portrayed, and the non-cooperation movement, satyagraha movement, and others were also emphasized. So by reading literature, students get to know what were the what was the society at that time, how students or how people used to survive, how the revolutions were taking place, what were the movements that were taking place for the independence, and how India got independence, and what were the main movements that are responsible for it. And we also got to know a lot about our freedom fighters. So not just the text that we read, we also read the history, we also understood the Indian culture, we also understood that how India is formed, and through that we can form our prospects also, and we can develop our critical thinking. It believes in teaching grammar deductively. Since we studied that inductive teaching and deductive teaching are two different, inductive teaching mainly refers to the presentation of example followed by the theorem or the rule. However, deductive proposes the idea of putting up the rule first and then it is followed by example. In the second part of this lecture, we focused mainly on direct method, and we understood that how direct method brought reforms in the language teaching and learning pedagogy. So it was not merely based on translation, and it was also not merely based on considering teacher as a central or a main part of the classroom, but it gives more expansion to students as well as to the teacher. It gave more scope of learning spoken and listening skills. So the target is to make the students communicate in language. Since the conversation takes place, dialogue occurs, students ask the questions, teacher responds to it, the object is being used, and a rapport between the student and the teacher is formed. So we see that communication is largely emphasized in the direct method. Then we see that culture is taught as people's daily lives in addition to literature and fine arts. So culture is mainly responsible, and it is not being isolated, and it is not merely a part of literature only, it is something which is included in our daily lives. So if we incorporate examples from our real life situations or real life scenarios, we will be able to trace out many examples of cultural practices. So in the direct method, we not only focused on the part of the literature, but through the conversation, through the dialogues, or through the object presentation, we can make out or figure out a lot of things that are being happening today, and we can learn the language through our daily or through our frequent conversational practices. In the slide, as you see, that dictation can be used as a worthwhile activity for practicing direct method. In addition, we see that grammar is used inductively. Now there is again a contrast here. Why I am talking inductive and deductive approach? Because these approaches have given two distinct ways to language learning and teaching pedagogies, and grammar is taught. So grammar is taught inductively. And why I am saying that inductive and deductive approaches are too important? In the deductive approach, it is becoming old and it is not very encouraged, because students are confined to that rule, and they may not develop a large understanding as compared to the inductive method. So one of the key differences that we see in the grammar translation and the direct method is that grammar is taught deductively in grammar translation. However, in direct method, grammar is taught inductively. Dear learners, since you have gone through both the methods and you have learned the techniques of it as well, now let us try to reflect of what is appropriate with regard to modern day scenario. And that's why I'm putting up some questions here. Try to analyze these questions and gather the answers of it. So the first question that is over here is that, do you agree that the goal of the target language, do you agree that the target language instruction should be used as a medium of instruction? So target language should be used as medium of instruction or not? You can agree or disagree also. If you agree, you can support your answer by explaining that target language can support spoken communication. It can also facilitate listening skills. Besides, if you do not agree, you can largely emphasize on the importance of translation method. So it is up to you which side would you like to take it. The second thing is, what do you think should be the role of the teacher in the classroom? Do you think that teacher should play a central role, or do you agree of the point that students should take a front role and students should be the central tenet of any classroom? And what about the chance, the participation of the students in the classroom? Should they be given an equal opportunity to participate in the real life situations, or should they be guided with only literary text or pieces? So I'm writing over here, what should be the role of students and teachers? Now my next question is, which techniques do you like most in grammar translation method, and which technique do you like most in direct method? So you can gather at least 2 to 3 techniques that you like most in any of the grammar translation, and if you do not like any of the techniques, then you can tell why do you think so. So I'm sure there would have been some points that you would like to make, and you would have experienced some techniques in your real life situations also. You might have been using it in your classroom, and you can eventually make out which kind of technique is really successful and how does it work with students outcome. So which technique would you prefer most? You can state either one method, you can state it for some points from grammar translation method and direct method, and you can put up your point in any way you think is better. So here are the references, and with this we have come to an end of this session. Thank you very much for joining. We will take up two other approaches of language teaching and learning in the next class. Thank you.
Understanding oneself, understanding others, understanding society at large, understanding the nature, these are all driven by basic human curiosity. We would all love to understand why things happen, what happens, what is the final outcome, why certain things fail. These are all exercises that we perform in various domains of knowledge. Therefore, knowledge in various domains, you would realize they are actually social artifacts. They have to be rooted into historical perspective, they have to be culturally salient, and there would be socio-political reasons behind this. Whether you talk with respect to engineering sciences, whether you talk with respect to physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, that's the reason why humanities and social sciences should be understood by all of us. The knowledge that is segregated, that is divided with respect to areas, specializations, all of them needs to be understood in its context. And what provides the context? It is the social reality. How do you correlate knowledge in a given domain with the cultural reality, with the social reality, with the socio-political compulsions? Okay, how do you understand the law of nature, okay, in its totality? And for doing that, you require the understanding of humanities and social sciences. Say for instance, if you are trying to understand the effect of a particular bacteria, a virus, any microbe, how it affects behavior, how it affects the organism, human being, you start looking at it from a pure biological point of view. If you are trying to look at a particular type of a wavelength, say for example, you are emphasizing on the understanding of the effect of radiation on human life, you are looking at things from a physical point of view. You are looking at the corresponding changes inside the body, you are looking at the physiological side of the understanding of the information. You are trying to understand why, despite knowing the risk that is inbuilt in the process, why still human beings engage into it. You are looking at it from a pure behavioral point of view. Why society at large admire things which has full of risk. You are trying to understand things from a pure sociological point of view. Why people use particular set of words to explain those experiences. You are trying to understand things from the linguistic point of view. So, there are a whole lot of things, and then finally you try to combine all of them to say that what are the guiding principles in life, then you say you are looking at life, you are looking at humanity from a pure philosophical point of view. And this is what social sciences courses provide you. They provide the context to you in which you would be finally positioning the understanding of the knowledge in any given domain. It could be engineering, it could be sciences, it could be medical sciences, it could be social sciences stuff, it could be humanities stuff. So, contextualizing the knowledge is what humanities social science courses help you obtain.